Welcome to this episode from our library studio of the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. We're going to continue our series on the Antichrist, an individual that we have now identified. And we've even spoken not only of his identity, but what he's going to accomplish, if you want to use those terms, what he's going to perpetrate on the world. What's going to be a consequence of his time, which will be another 8 years. The havoc that he will wreak, and even the dates that he will perpetrate his plan, as well as who the victims will ultimately be. So there is no mystery in all of this. We're using the term Antichrist only because it resonates with people. I have proven that there was no Christ, that Paul made him up in 52 CE, that the person that he was counterfeiting was actually David, the real Messiah and Son of God, who fulfilled Passover by crucifixion, which he himself explained prophetically in his own narrative, in his own words, in the 22nd Mizmor, and which Yahweh then, in the 89th Mizmor, corroborated everything that could be known about Dod as our Savior, his chosen one, our shepherd, our king, our Messiah, and his son. And my job is to reintroduce the world to Yahweh's name and to point out all that God's beloved son, David, has and will continue to accomplish. And as we searched through the book of Daniel, and we will still pursue another chapter of Daniel, I think we have two left actually to pursue. What we will determine is precisely how all of these pieces fall into place. And as we have done so in the context, also keeping Daniel's prophetic testimony, it wasn't Daniel, it was actually Gabriel and Michael, who were the two prophets speaking to Daniel. Daniel served as the scribe. We have to keep what they said through Daniel in context with what was revealed through the prophet Yeshayah and what was conveyed also by Satan's accomplice in Ezekiel, so that we know exactly how all of these pieces fit together. And when we do so, it becomes obvious that the devil incarnate, the man who is already demon possessed, the one that is being sought as the Antichrist, is none other than the copper confabulator, the great dumpster that is the Trump, Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. The reason that there is no correlation now between what he says and reality is because he is demon possessed. He has gone from a malignant narcissist to a covert psychopath as he has transitioned from Trump 45 to Trump 47. Now, as for me, it doesn't matter one way or another as to whether you believe that's true, whether you're a MAGA and you are still trumping Trump, or you are a Marxist condemning him, makes no difference to me. I'm going to tell you the facts. I'm going to lay them out on the table so that you know them. And when it becomes obvious that what I have told you is true, then maybe you'll listen. But between now and then, I just want you to know what I have learned. And in the midst of our review of Daniel, we turned to the 83rd Psalm. We did so because there's also a 10-nation group that is presented in it. We wanted to see if there was any tie-in between it and what I call the Big Ten Conference, the 10 heads of state that will partner with Donald Trump as he pursues the divestiture of Israel, such that an Islamic State is gouged out of the heart of Israel. It's called the two-state solution. Land given to people who I call the fake Palestinians for promises of peace, something that Islam has ever known. And it's going to lead to Israel becoming indefensible. And that's going to happen over the next 2 years, and could happen, and in fact will likely happen over the next year. So I want you to know all that can be known about the 10 states that will either be belligerents in this next variation of Alaska Mosque, what they called Alaska Flood. It's going to be Alaska Flood 2.0, and I think the nations that are listed here will all be contributors to the jihadists for that attack, as well as who the bonehead blowhards are that will join Trump and the dismemberment of Israel. So as we proceed with the 83rd Mizmor Psalm, it reads, "They say, we want to annihilate them as a nation. Such the name of Israel is no longer remembered ever again throughout time." This has never occurred. The Babylonians had no interest in eradicating the name of Israel. The Egyptians before them had no interest in doing so. The Babylonians didn't. So Mitzrayim, Egypt, no. Assyria, no. Babylon, no. The Greeks, no. Even the Romans had no interest in obliterating the name of Israel. As a matter of fact, the only thing that come close to it is when Hadrian decided he was going to rename Judea Palestina, but he wasn't trying to obliterate the name Israel. He didn't even know the name Israel. It was the province of Judea, because Yahud was all that was left after the Assyrian invasion in the 7th century, 6th, 7th century BCE. So this has not happened until right now. Even with the Roman Catholic Church, they weren't trying to obliterate the name of Israel. They wanted to claim the name of Israel for themselves. They wanted it remembered as representing their church. And so it is now. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Free Palestine. That there is this open call to obliterate Israel, such that the name of Israel is no longer remembered. So this is prophetic of Dod, our king, of a time 3,000 years removed from the moment he put quill to parchment to scribe these lyrics. And that is pretty remarkable in and of itself, is it not? That we are reading something that he wrote that had not been true for 3,000 years, and then all of a sudden, right now, before us, as we examine the events of the last days, it is being fulfilled before our eyes, and it's undeniable. So this is the curse of Islam, with Marxists having joined their hideous chorus. It is the message behind Free Palestine. Should there have been any reluctance to accept the realization that the foes who are seeking to destroy Israel are Muslims, this certainly lays that to rest. While the Romans and the Nazis were hell-bent on enslaving and annihilating Jews, only Islam seeks to replace Israel with an Islamic state. The Nazis wanted to use Jews to rob them, to kill them, but they had no interest in Israel. Muslims want it for no other reason than to demonstrate that their religion and God are superior to Israel and Yahweh. As I have mentioned, Hadrian didn't consult with anyone when he initiated his plan to convert Jerusalem into a playground for the legions. Moreover, his preference was to enslave Jews rather than kill them, although he did plenty of both. But he was motivated for economic reasons, as were all Romans. And even then, there was no Israel in his day to eradicate, only Judea. Assyria and Babylon, even Egypt, wanted slaves and booty too, but had no interest in the nation. The Greeks hardly knew the country existed. But it is Quranic for Muslims to commit their lives to wiping Israel off the face of the earth while annihilating Yehudim. Now, to be fair, and to place blame where it rightly belongs, it was Rome which replaced the name Yehudah with Palestine. But there was no Israel when Rome trashed the temple and the land. Israel had been obliterated by the Assyrians circa 700 BCE. So this does not apply to Rome. Moreover, Hadrian was sneaky and never actually made this claim. But Muslims have and do. For they deliberate, they plan, they decide, together with one accord, to cut a treaty against you. Now, in this case, the Romans didn't create treaties against Israel. The Nazis didn't do this either. Nor did the Egyptians, nor did the Babylonians. This treaty that is being schemed to be cut against Israel at this time, that there are those around the world who are exceedingly vocal today, saying death to Israel. That treaty that is being deliberated, planned, and decided in one accord is the same one that is mentioned in the 9th chapter of Daniel. That is the treaty that is affirmed with many. It is the same treaty that slices Israel at its waist to the point it becomes no longer defensible in the 17th chapter of Isaiah. And so now we have 3 confirmations, all providing the proper time. The other 2 associated with the timing of Shabuah, prior to Dod's return, 7 years prior to Dod's return with Yahowah, and this one with the time that there was an active plea worldwide to completely obliterate the name Israel, to wipe Israel from the face of the earth. And that there will be a plan with one accord to cut a treaty, a karat, against Israel. It's pretty extraordinary when you have Gabriel as Dod and Daniel affirming this. Then you have Dod again here, this would have been 400 years earlier, as the lyricist explaining it. And then in between those 2 events, you have Yeshaya as the prophet speak of this same thing. This is the divestiture of Israel, which is called the 2-state solution, that will afford a terrorist enclave cut out of the heart of Israel, making the nation thinner at the waist and indefensible, that is imminent and that is now assured. So after renouncing the terms of UN Resolution 242 and punctuating their rejection of its implications by attacking Israel not once but 3 times, on each occasion trying to obliterate Israel, Muslims now want their reinterpretation of the UN resolution unilaterally imposed. This is the treaty that will thin Israel at the waist and prompt the Great Jihad, Al-Aqsa Flood 2.0. And since it is being sponsored by Donald Trump, because we're told emphatically by Yeshaya Isaiah in the 18th chapter that the man and nation that arrogantly and presumptuously causes Israel's downfall is Donald Trump in the United States of America. And this is reaffirmed in this same context throughout Daniel. Of course, and it is now imminent. And the only way this occurs in the United Nations and with many people is for Donald Trump to vote in favor of the divestiture of Israel land. Be very much like what he is sponsoring in a way with Ukraine, where he will claim to have achieved peace by offering Ukraine all manner of security agreements, none of which will be worth anything. And America never honors its security agreements, and it won't this time either. So that's what's going to happen. Israel is going to believe that America will protect it, and it's going to find out that is not even remotely true. Donald Trump is the great betrayer, and that should be evident. What most do not appreciate about UN 242 is that the Muslim rejection of the resolution and subsequent demand that it be reimposed is akin to refusing to buy an estate that's offered under duress at exceedingly low prices, and then torching and looting the place, terrorizing and killing its inhabitants in an effort to steal it. Then, when that backfires, they demand that the tormented sellers ignore all that has transpired and accept the original deals that the terrorists belligerently refused. Sounds rather inane to me. How about you? This list of historic people and places seeks to identify those who will be active in the destruction of Israel, either by releasing a flood of enraged jihadists and inundating the nation in Islamic barbarism, or being among those sponsoring this treaty against the nation to make Israel indefensible. The designees commence with Edom, which was Esau's descendants and homeland. Previously, when searching for the modern equivalent, I learned that they were represented by Roman Catholicism and those influenced by the legacy of Rome today, especially the European Union and the Americas, recognizing that Imperial Rome was founded by the Caesars, which means hairy, and that the empire was draped in red. We find that upon his birth, Esau was called, yes, indeed, hairy and red. To encourage enlightenment, the Dode wrote, and to provide clarity. This is regarding the transitory residents who are camping out of one, Edom. The men in red. These would be the Edomites, representing the nature of what would be known as Imperial Rome, and after them, Roman Catholics with their love affair for red. Edom is the name ascribed to Esau, who was born hairy, Caesar, and red, symbolic of Imperial Rome, and by extension, Roman Catholicism. Geographically, a mountainous tract between the Dead Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba in southern Jordan and in southern Israel. 2. Yishmaelim. The Yishmaelim, that is, a man hears a God. The Ishmaelites, they represent Arabian Sunni Muslims. They are individuals listening to the gods, the progenitor of the Arabians and the forefather of Islam. Today, you can find it geographically in central, western, and northern Arabia, into Syria and Iraq, including both Mecca and Yathrib, today's Medina. 3. Moab, questionable father. The Moabites represent those of questionable parentage, such as Marxists, MAGA, and Pauline Christians. It's Moab, who's your daddy? An unthinking, warlike, and multicultural religious and political culture born out of incest, literally, after being indoctrinated in the immoral morass of Sodom, with shared Hebrew writings which were twisted and intermixed with pagan lore to form Christian and socialist secular viewpoints. It's the place where the Torah's voice died. From Ma, to question the who, what, and why of Ab, the father, who is related to Moba and Moal, the path which leads in the opposite direction. Geographically, this is located in western Jordan, east of the Dead Sea. 4. The Hagri, muttering. That's what it means. These are the Hagarenes. They are of Egyptian origin, and they migrated from central Jordan to Mesopotamia. Hagri, the meaning of Hagar, and thus either depicting the slaves to Allah and Egypt or Arabians in present-day Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Oman, and representing a nomadic tribe along the Persian Gulf. This is Mizmor 83:6. Number 5, Gabal. Borders is what the word means, representing Biblos and thus the Christian Bible, Lebanon, and those imposing borders on Israel. Gabal means to set limits and borders. It's indicative of the UN resolutions towards Israel. It's a Phoenician city near Tyre, between Tripoli and Beirut, and ancient Biblos, which was the basis of the word Bible, and of Protestant fundamentalist Christians, located, of course, in Lebanon. Number 6, pertaining to people, it's Ammon, and nations, representing the dim-witted nature of man. Ammon is related to and amplifying the family of man, from Ammon, to be dim-witted and eclipsed, located in central Jordan today, geographically where the so-called Palestinian refugees number in the range of 2.1 million. It says Lot's younger daughter named her son Ammon as an expression of the incestuous relationship with her father, indicative of the so-called Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It is from people, nation, and family, and compatriots, and all things pertaining to people. Number 7, Amalek, wretched ones, representing the fearsome, malcontent Muslim militants. Amalek, the ruthless and warlike descendants of Esau. So Roman and Arabians who would become Christians and Muslims from Amel, to be miserable, inflict misery through wicked work, the grievous travail of perverse toil, located today in the Sinai Peninsula. And number 8, Paleshe, the so-called Palestinians, representing Muslims in Gaza, Israel, Judea, and Samaria, who are invading terrorists. Paleshe, to mourn terrorists, from Palazuth, fearsome and horrible terrorism, creating severe distress. Palitz, to be unstable, and Palash, to roll in the dust and ashes, addressing the condition of Gaza. Located in Gaza, of course, Israel, Judea, Samaria, and what's called the West Bank. These 8 are in league with the adversary during this time of trouble, and adversarial influences who live to harass and persecute. Mizmor, Psalm 83:7. If this list is addressing the locations, which I think it is, from which the Islamic jihadists will invade Israel in Al-Aqsa 2.0, then it is from all around, from inside out and from outside in. Mapping this onslaught, it will come from the Egyptian Sinai, Saudi Arabia, the Persian Gulf states, like Qatar and UAE, from Jordan, of course from Syria, which then would include Turks coming down through Syria into Israel, and Lebanon, with the overt support of the nations in Rome's shadow throughout Europe, and those influenced by Roman Catholicism, and culminating with these belligerents will be the addition of the Palestinians, who will bludgeon Israel from the left, from the right, and from the inside out. These combatants, based upon the next statements, which we must either include direct support from the Shia Muslims in Iraq and Iran, while also doubling down on Syria, which is now an Islamic state controlled by Turkey. Or we are being told that this is being orchestrated by the Assyrian, who is the adversary himself. There is even a final reference to him being the product of Lot, which speaks of the same reprehensible dunderhead and sexual pervert that we've come to know as Donald Trump. It is possible that the Tsar, the trouble, is in the ninth and final name of the initial list, conspiring the places Muslims will emerge to deluge Israel with their flood of terror and hate. However, it is more likely a word than a name, one we have addressed twice previously, and since Tyre now no longer exists, we find ourselves readily identify these culprits as troublesome foes, anguishing adversaries, and unfavorable flints used to kindle a heated reaction, such as a knife to slash and kill among those with pent-up hostility. And of course, that would include a lot of people today, from Marxists and MAGAs to Muslims. Now, as we have come to know, Sar is the word that describes the time of Yaakov's, or Israel's, Shar troubles. It speaks of adversarial influences and of a great tribulation. These references transport us from Doe's day to the last days. But even more revealing, Sar addresses the very event in opposition to Yahweh and Yisrael that so many have been scheming to deploy, which is the narrowing of Israel, crowding and confining her people such that they can more effectively harass and terrorize them. For those reading along in other books, you are aware that we have determined that the Assyrian is none other than the adversary Hasatan. So this next statement could be addressing the man Satan has possessed, President Trump. If not, then there is the other possibility that the reference is to Shia Muslims now under the footprint of the ancient kingdom of Ashur, today's Syria, Iraq, and Iran. Here is what Dode wrote. Moreover, another is receiving money from them to join in with them, and he is accompanying this association as payback to Ashur the Assyrian. They exist at this moment as the armed forces and military of what was sown by the children of Israel, of Lot, of the inappropriate and incestuous one, the sodomite. So let's now pause and reflect upon this. Psalm 83:8. I have done a number of series of programs called Trump's Criminal Enterprises, where I have demonstrated that Donald Trump and company have received at least $16.5 million in bribes from 3 Arab tyrants, particularly from Al Thani of Qatar and MBS of Saudi Arabia. And that for the 16.5 billion in bribes that he has received, that Trump is obliged to provide payback, and he will. And serving up Israel so that its heart is exposed is precisely what they wanted. And so it is to the adversary, the Assyrian, that Donald Trump is going to provide payback. That is what this is saying. He received the money. He has joined in with them. He is in accompaniment with them, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates. And he is going to serve Satan, who is Allah, in this regard. That's frightening, but it's true. Dode knew it. He saw it as a prophet. And they exist at this moment as the armed forces and the military of what was sown by the children of Lot, of an inappropriate and incestuous relationship. You can't have a more inappropriate relationship than the United States being wed to the tyrants of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, with Qatar being the bank of Islamic terrorism, particularly of Hamas and of the sponsor of the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel, the one that is funding the revolution that's taking place in the streets and the college campuses across Europe and the United States, the one that has bought influencers on the far left and far right throughout the world. And then of Saudi Arabia, the very birthplace of Islam, this plague that is destroying the world, this plague that is totally undemocratic. It's the worst possible incestuous relationship that could possibly be formed, but this is exactly what Donald Trump has done. And he will pledge the U.S. military, as has happened in the past, to fight on behalf of these tyrants, which means against Israel. And though David, our king, has reported on this in our past so that we would know our future. It is a sad situation indeed. And that's why he wants us to reflect upon it. The point here is that the sexually perverted adversary's advocate is a sodomite. There has never been a more sexually perverted leader of a nation than Donald Trump. And he has been bribed by the very tyrants of the lands that have just been described. And he is the head of a massive armed force, one that has never fought for Israel, but has fought to defend Israel's foes. The largest supplier of weapons to Muslims by many times over, more than the rest of the world combined. And he's going to provide payback. Therefore, this adversary is betraying God's people, and he is the Copper Con, the rapist, real estate developer, and egomaniac who will emerge from Satan's autobiography. And not only does he come up with 25 ways to kill a Jew, Ezekiel has 2 entire chapters devoted to a perverted rape scene, 2 of them. And who better to fulfill that than Donald Trump? And of course, Donald Trump is the one that's described by the Copper Man, that is the real estate developer, that is so prominent in the closing chapters of Ezekiel, that is measuring the monstrosity that the Lord, who is Satan, wants to build to obliterate the Temple Mount and Jerusalem. It is exactly what Donald Trump would crave doing most, is building the ultimate monstrosity that would bear his name in the most contested place on earth. And that's why he is the Copper Con, measure boy, the real estate developer of Ezekiel. If I may summarize by collapsing the gap of time resident in the rhetoric, we have just learned that the adversary will pummel Israel with the combined forces of Edom, the men in red, representing the legacy of Imperial Rome and Roman Catholics. The Yishmaelim, the man who claims to hear a God, representing the Assyrian Sunni Muslims. Moab, those of a questionable father, representing Marxist, MAGA, and Pauline Christians. The Hagri, muttering, representing Egyptians who migrated from central Jordan to the Persian Gulf. Gabal of the borders, representing those of Byblos, the Bible, and even Lebanon, and those imposing borders on Israel. The Ammon, pertaining to the people and nations representing the dim-witted nature of man. Amalek, the wretched ones representing the fearsome malcontent Muslim militants, and the Paleshe, or the so-called Palestinians, representing the murderous Muslims in Gaza, Israel, Judea, and Samaria, even in Jordan, who are invading terrorists Collectively, these belligerents will be in league with the adversary at this time of trouble, each with a penchant to slash and kill Jews while anguishing and persecuting all that Israel represents. Moreover, the Assyrian, who is leading this charge, is receiving money from them, such that he will join in with them as payback, thereby orchestrating the armed forces of the sons of the Sodomite, America, led by Donald Trump. Well, this list was not designed to identify any of the 10 horns of Daniel 7. It has done nothing to disqualify any of the previous candidates. The top 8 still remain as MBS, Al-Thani, Macron, Starmer, Merz, Maloney, Carney, and Erdogan from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, France, UK, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Turkey as the leading contenders. Then you can choose 2 of the following to round out the Big Ten Conference: Sisi, Pope Leo, Al-Shara, and Al-Nahyan of Egypt, the RCC, Syria, and United Arab Emirates, in addition to the possibility even of Netanyahu of Israel. This is not only breathtaking in its implications, but there should also be little doubt that this prophecy, and the one found in Daniel 7 and also in Isaiah 17 and 18, depict the same time, people, and events, albeit presented with considerable more detail by Dode in this case. One of the many reasons that I think that this prophetic mizmor was scribed by Yahweh's beloved son and not by a lowly musician is that he may have been the only man close enough to Yahweh to speak in the following manner to him. Moreover, these words reflect Dode's temperament as surely as they do Yahweh's. They read, "I would like for you to engage and for you to do to them similarly to Midian, the seductive enticers and their contentious strife, as was the case with Sisera, the sadistic general. Like what happened to Yaban, understanding Yah, at the river Kishon, trapped in circular reasoning, who were decimated at En Dor, the eye of the generations, with them becoming dung for the ground." Mizmor song with lyrics, Psalm 83:10. Let's examine a few of these. On Dode's list, you'll find that there's a considerable amount of similarity between them. There's not actually this many individuals. They are related. Not all of them, but many of them. So first, Dode is saying, I want you, Yahweh, to do to that group that's going to invade Israel during the last days. And I've shared with you each of their names, where they come from geographically and what they represent symbolically based upon the names that were given to them. And Dode here, as our returning king, our Messiah and Savior, is asking Yahweh to do to them similarly to what was done to Midian, these seductive enticers and their contentious strife. It means to be judged and to be banished as a result of being seduced into contentious strife. These are northwestern Arabians, not far from what would become Mecca and Medina, who were ravaged twice for having harmed the children of Israel, even after having previously befriended Moshe and providing his wife. As was the case with Sisera, he was a sadistic general. He was the Canaanite military commander who tortured the Israelite slaves for 20 years, but then was killed by a woman while his warriors were exterminated. Like what happened to Yaban, understanding, to understand, the Canaanite king of Hazar, whose entire military was wiped out to free his Israelite slaves. When Yahweh worked through the prophet and judge, Deborah, and Barak, the blessing of the word. At the river Kishon, trapped in circular reasoning. Kishon means to be lured in and trapped by that which is circuitous, serpentine, and winding. Those who were decimated, who were destroyed and exterminated at Ein Dor, at the eye of the generations, means perspective of time and human habitations, the view of mankind, the town where the Canaanites were defeated by the understanding of the prophet and judge Deborah and Barak. And it is also where King Saul met with the necromancer spiritualist. And so Dode has said, I want all of these to be turned into dung for the ground. And that is terraforming, if you will, taking those who would harm Israel to destroy her people, rape and plunder God's nation, and transform them into dung, which is fertilizer, if you will, for the ground. So this is the sign of a brilliant mind. Not only could Dode recall and properly document these foes, he chose scum who had once befriended Israel, who had a strong woman at the heart of their story. In Bamidbar, Numbers 31, 1 through 53, Yahweh asked Moshe, who was married to a Midianite woman, to hold Midian accountable for having led the Israelites astray at Baal-Por, the Lord of the broad and open way. Every Midian man was slain, including their 5 kings and Balaam, lords, because they enticed Yah's children into being religious and into worshiping the Lord. At the time, the women and children were taken captive, but Moshe objected to sparing the women's lives because they were the ones who were most responsible for tempting the Israelites. Understanding the gravity of their offense, he ordered the execution of all adult women, allowing only the girls who had not taken part in the seduction to live. And yet, even with the gravity of the crime and subsequent penalty for religious behavior so unabashedly presented in the Torah, 3 religions irrationally claim that their God inspired it. I understand that Muslims are generally too stupid to understand cause and effect, and that Christians make a game out of pretending that the Torah does not apply to them. But what is the rabbinical excuse? And this was all punishment for being enticed to worship the Lord. The Lord appears in all of those religions, does he not? The Lord is Satan. Since our Midian investigations have been thorough in other books within this Yada Yahowah family, we know that there was another encounter with the Midians, which explains why they remain on God's domim, feces list. We can't say the other word, right? Feces list, excrement. That story was told in Shaphat, Decide, Judges 6 and 7. We reviewed it in Observations, Volume 4, Chapter 3, aptly named Day of Midian. There we found Midian in concert with Amalek, the Amalekites, systematically harassing Israel and robbing and plundering them. Working with Gideon, God and his reluctant troubadour went out about the business of demolishing the altars made to the Lord and to Asherah, the mother of God. Then with the 300 men who would not prostrate themselves and equipped only with shofars and torches, Gideon, at Yahweh's direction, put an end to those militant and thieving religious terrorists, chasing them out of the promised land. This event is so vital to Israel's future and its disposition. The prophecy regarding Dode and Yeshaya is in Yeshaya 9, Also, it's the prequel, if you will, to the presentation of the Son who was given to us. It's introduced by reference to the day of Midian. This is an important story, the ridding of the promised land, of the Lord, and of the Mother of God, who became the basis of Christianity. Moving on to the next game, and by the way, the Mother of God, Asherah, is also very much enshrined into Islam. They celebrate to this day Asherah Day. Moving on to the next name in God's domain, S-H-I-T list. Sisera was surprisingly fitting as a candidate. He became overtly exuberant in the harassment of Jews. This story opens with Israel becoming so religious that Yahweh, realizing that they could no longer have any appreciation for what he had said or done for them, particularly as he freed them from Mitzrayim, saw to it that they were once again enslaved. That's what they wanted. That's what they requested. He gave it to them. This time it would be by the Canaanite king Hazor Yabin. However, the king's commander, Sisera, went way too far, cruelly oppressing the Israelites for 20 years. So, through the judge and prophet, Deborah, Yahweh intervened on behalf of his tormented children, freeing them once again, of which, of course, they showed no appreciation. But that's the nature of Israel. While Sisera survived the ensuing battle, his fate was sealed when all of his 900 ironclad charioteers were routed during the retreat. Sisera sought refuge in a tent of a supposed ally, only to have one of its tent pegs thrust through his temple by a woman. It was fitting, because it was a woman who inspired the return to God and was the one who displayed courage in overthrowing this adversary. So Dod is asking Yahweh to do to Yisrael's final foes what he had done to his people's ancient foes. He had no respect for any leader seeking to harm his people, and he was always willing to make an example of them, turning despicable rulers into dung to fertilize the ground. That said, Dod's animosity was directed towards kings, to generals and priests, not to their stooges, even though he realized that those who follow along will also fall. So, to keep this in mind, Dod is projecting the past onto the future in this prophecy to make a point, thereby not only revealing the fate of those who trouble Israel, circa 2025 through 2033, but also that Yahweh is consistent, opposing Israel and Yehudim, comes at the price of divine retribution. He wrote, "Make their leaders who are inclined like Oreb, the Arabian of toxic darkness, and like Zeeb, the wolf, even like Zabak, to slaughter and kill, and like Sasmuna, having the likeness withheld and protection denied. Everyone who exercises authority." Psalm 83:11. So here, this will be our last statement for this program, but let's take a pass through and try to make as much sense of it as we can. It begins with make, to impose on, set forth. Dod was focused on their leaders, on the leaders who are inclined to harm Israel in this way, like Oreb. Oreb is based on Arab, and it speaks of Arabians of toxic darkness, mingling and mixing together that which is dark, an interwoven tapestry of people who swarm in like noxious flies. Oreb was the Midian leader who was killed by Gideon's advance. And like Zeeb the wolf, the predatory Midian priest killed during the Israelite reprisal. It is a compound name in Baal-zebub, the lord of the wolf, and associated with the most predatory Benjamite of all, who is the wolf in sheep's clothing, Shaul, Paul, and therefore Christianity. And even like Zabak, to slaughter and kill. Zabak means to sacrifice, to butcher, to slay. He was a Mennonite king during the day of Gideon. And like Salmuna, having one's likeness withheld and protection denied, means walking in a faltering manner, in the shadow of those who are lame and crippled, slipping and stumbling down, becoming incapacitated, paralyzed, and debilitated, therefore following in the lame footsteps of Shaul, Paul, who was crippled and fell during his conversion experience. From Sa'el, the likeness and shadow and protection and mana to be withheld and denied. He was also a Mennonite king. I think this also speaks of Donald Trump, who is foretold in the character of Paul. Paul was a sexual pervert by his own admission. Paul was an egomaniac by his own admission. Paul was clearly a psychopath, as is Donald Trump. And so they really are very, very similar individuals. And Paul claimed he was crippled, and we're watching the crippling of Donald Trump. So he is, Dode, our king, is speaking of God seeking retribution against all of those who exercise authority, who claim to be prime ministers and kings and heads of state. It's those people that he has his argument against. And it's true that Gideon continued to pursue the Midian kings, Zabak and Salmuna, and so was insistent that they also be held accountable. And he refused to eat until they were under his control. He shared Yahweh's intense disdain for those who claim and then exercise religious, political, and military authority. And so this is a good place for us to conclude this program. We will continue with our presentation on the Antichrist in another episode tomorrow. I thank you very much for listening and being part of the YAHOWAH blog. Good day.